How does a mighty power bounce back from total catastrophe? When we talk about Rome after Arausio, it's about a republic on the edge of collapse, facing tens of thousands of dead soldiers, panic across northern Italy, and the terrifying possibility that migrating Germanic tribes could overrun the peninsula. Rome desperately needed strategy, leadership, and a complete rethink of its army. And that's where Gaius Marius comes in. He was the man who would rebuild the Roman legions, forge them into a disciplined professional force, and lead them into one of the most decisive battles of the Republic. Hello, we are Great History, your daily history channel, bringing you 30 minutes of history every day. If you want to help decide what appears next on this channel, don't forget to subscribe and help us reach 50,000 subscribers. So, today, we will explore the Roman army's transformation after Arausio, the brilliant strategies and reforms Marius introduced, and the battle that marked Rome's shocking comeback, Aquae Sextiae. We'll look at how political, social, and military innovations converged in this critical moment and show how the Republic, teetering on the brink of extinction, clawed its way back to victory. In 105 BC, the Roman Republic faced its most devastating military defeat at the Battle of Arausio. Two Roman armies, led by Consul Gnaeus Mallius Maximus and Proconsul Quintus Cirilius Scipio, were annihilated by the migrating Germanic tribes, the Cimbri and Teutones, near the Rhone River in modern-day France. The Romans suffered catastrophic losses, with estimates of up to 120,000 soldiers and camp followers killed, marking the worst defeat in Roman history, surpassing even the infamous Battle of Cannae. The aftermath of Arausio was politically tumultuous. The failure of the Roman commanders, Scipio and Mallius, to coordinate effectively led to the disaster. Scipio's refusal to cooperate with Mallius, even when ordered by the Senate, and his subsequent hasty attack on the Cimbri without proper preparation, contributed to the defeat. This lack of unity and strategic missteps undermined the confidence of the Roman populace in their leaders. In response to the crisis, the Senate sought new leadership. Gaius Marius, a military tribune with a reputation for competence, was elected consul in 107 BC, despite his lack of aristocratic lineage. His rise marked a significant shift in Roman politics, as he represented the equestrian class rather than the traditional patrician elite. Marius recognized that the traditional Roman military system, reliant on property-zoning citizens, was inadequate to meet the challenges posed by the Germanic invasions. In 107 BC, he initiated reforms that would transform the Roman army. Prior to Marius's reforms, military service was restricted to Roman citizens who met certain property qualifications, ensuring that soldiers had a vested interest in defending the state. However, the massive casualties suffered at Arausio left the Roman army critically undermanned. In response, Marius opened military service to the caput sensi, the landless poor who had previously been excluded due to the property requirements for military service. This move allowed Rome to recruit a larger and more diverse pool of soldiers, addressing the immediate manpower shortage and providing opportunities for the lower classes to gain land and wealth through military service. Marius also professionalized the Roman army through several major reforms that went far beyond simply recruiting more men. He standardized the equipment each legionary carried, making sure soldiers had uniform arms and armor for both effectiveness and ease of logistics. Every soldier received a gladius, a short sword for close combat, a pilum, a heavy throwing spear designed to bend on impact so enemies couldn't reuse it, a scutum, a large rectangular shield for formation fighting, and protective armor, usually a lorica hamata, chainmail, or for wealthier soldiers, a bronze breastplate. Helmets, greaves, and belts were also regulated to ensure that soldiers moved efficiently and presented a unified appearance on the battlefield. Beyond equipment, Marius introduced rigorous and standardized training regimens. Legionaries drilled daily in formations, practiced coordinated maneuvers, and trained in both attack and defense strategies, including the famous testudo formation, where shields interlocked overhead to protect against missile fire. Discipline was enforced strictly. Soldiers learned to obey commands without hesitation and to trust their comrades in the chaos of battle. This created a sense of cohesion and professionalism that earlier citizen militias, drawn from small farmers with varying levels of experience, had often lacked. Tactically, Marius replaced the older manipula system with the cohort as the main unit of the army. Cohorts were larger, more self-sufficient units that could operate flexibly, support one another, and maneuver effectively on complex battlefields. This allowed commanders to respond to sudden threats, exploit weaknesses in enemy lines, and maintain cohesion during prolonged engagements. Symbolism and morale were also a part of his reforms. Marius made the eagle, or aquila, the sole standard of each legion, placing the multiple animal and symbolic standards previously used. The eagle became a powerful emblem of unity and pride, with soldiers viewing it as a sacred representation of their legion and honor. Losing an eagle in battle was unthinkable, which strengthened discipline and inspired fierce loyalty among troops. Together, these reforms turned the Roman legions into a professional, well-equipped, and highly disciplined fighting force capable of coordinated maneuvers and sustained campaigns. They were no longer ad hoc citizen armies, but cohesive units. While Marius's reforms strengthened Rome's military capabilities, they also had unintended consequences. The creation of a professional army loyal to individual generals rather than to the state eroded the Senate's control over military affairs. This shift contributed to the eventual decline of the Roman Republic as military leaders gained increasing political power, leading to civil wars and the rise of imperial rule. So now, Rome was getting ready. But what about their rivals? After their crushing victory at Arausio, the Teutones didn't immediately push into Italy. Instead, they, along with the Cimbri and allied groups like the Ambrones, continued their southward migration through Gaul. Their priorities weren't just conquest. They were survival, gathering more followers and securing resources along the way. This migration wasn't a typical military campaign. It involved not only warriors, but also women, children, the elderly, and livestock essentially, an entire people on the move rather than a standard invading army. The Teutones used the delay wisely. They consolidated their forces, gathered more followers, and absorbed resources from the lands they moved through. Every step southward increased their numbers and strengthened their position. At the same time, their presence was a constant, invisible threat. Rome couldn't afford to ignore them, and this prolonged the Republic's state of high alert. Rome was confronting a socio-political challenge on a continental scale. Entire villages could be displaced, local economies disrupted, and trade routes and agricultural production thrown into chaos. Farmers and townspeople in northern Italy and southern Gaul lived under the constant shadow of invasion, knowing that a single misstep could result in loss of land, property, or even life. This created a domino effect. Displaced populations could flow toward Roman settlements, putting pressure on resources, spreading fear, and forcing Roman magistrates to allocate troops for security, logistics, and administration. Essentially, the Romans faced a combined challenge: a potential battlefield confrontation and the ongoing responsibility of maintaining stability in the provinces, all while ensuring that their reorganized army was ready for decisive engagement. In other words, Rome faced a dual challenge. One side, they had the Teutonic warriors, battle-ready and numerous. On the other, they had the responsibility of containing a massive population movement that could unravel local economies, provoke displacement, and even threaten Italy itself. Every strategic decision, from where to station troops to how to engage the enemy, had to account for both threats simultaneously. History does give us a detailed play-by-play of why the Romans and the Teutones clashed at Aquae Sextiae. Ancient sources offer hints, not a full account of their choices. It wasn't a random encounter, nor a formal challenge issued by either side. Rather, it was the inevitable result of Roman strategy meeting Teutonic migration. Gaius and his legions were moving to intercept a threat that could invade Italy, while the Teutones were pressing southward, bringing not just warriors, but families, livestock, and supplies. Where these paths crossed, a major confrontation became unavoidable. The battlefield was situated at the base of Mount Sextile, surrounded by natural defenses. The Romans positioned themselves on elevated ground, utilizing the slope to their advantage. This high ground allowed them to repel attacks more effectively, as the Teutones would have to ascend the slope, making them vulnerable to Roman projectiles and attacks. The surrounding wooded areas further hindered the enemy's movements, limiting their ability to maneuver and coordinate effectively. The Roman forces under Marius's command numbered approximately 35,000 men, including 6 legions, cavalry, and auxiliaries. These troops were well-trained, disciplined, and equipped with standardized Roman military gear, reflecting the reforms Marius had implemented. In contrast, the Teutones, along with their allies, the Ambrones, fielded an army estimated to be around 110,000 strong. However, their forces were not as cohesive. Many were encumbered by non-combatants, including women, children, and livestock, which slowed their movements and reduced their combat effectiveness. The Romans, despite being outnumbered, were confident in their training and leadership. Marius's strategic positioning and the soldiers' discipline bolstered their morale. On the other hand, the Teutones, having previously experienced significant victories, were overconfident and underestimated the Roman military capabilities. This hubris led to tactical errors, such as underestimating the terrain's impact and overextending their lines. Understanding the importance of morale, Marius employed psychological tactics to undermine the Teutones' confidence. He ordered his camp followers and non-combatants to march with the army, creating the illusion of a larger force. Additionally, he concealed a contingent of 3,000 soldiers in the woods to ambush the Teutones' rear during the forthcoming battle. These deceptive strategies aimed to instill doubt and fear among the Teutones, disrupting their cohesion and readiness. As the Teutones advanced, they were met with a well-prepared Roman defense. The Romans unleashed a barrage of javelins, causing significant casualties. Simultaneously, the concealed Roman contingent launched a surprise attack from the rear, enveloping the Teutones in a pincer movement. Caught off guard and surrounded, the Teutones were unable to mount an effective resistance. The combination of frontal assault and rear ambush led to a decisive Roman victory. The success of the ambush hinged on two fundamental principles: surprise and discipline. Marius's meticulous planning ensured that the Teutones were unaware of the impending attack, allowing the Romans to strike decisively. Furthermore, the disciplined execution of the plan by the Roman soldiers, trained under Marius's reforms, enabled them to perform complex maneuvers under pressure. The synchronization of these elements demonstrated the effectiveness of Roman military doctrine and the importance of leadership and preparation in warfare. The previous night's surprise attack had left the Teutones disoriented and demoralized. Their camp was in chaos, with warriors scrambling to regroup and non-combatants in distress. Disruptions significantly impacted their combat readiness, leaving them vulnerable to a well-coordinated Roman assault. Marius exploited the chaos among the Teutones by arranging his forces the next day in a carefully planned formation designed for both offense and flexibility. He divided his roughly 30,000 Roman soldiers into 4 main units: 2 legions on the flanks, 1 in the center, and a reserve force positioned slightly behind the front lines to reinforce any point under pressure. Each legion was itself divided into cohorts, the new tactical units introduced by Marius during his reforms. A typical cohort numbered around 480 men, fighting the legions with greater cohesion and maneuverability than the older manipular system. On the flanks, Marius positioned more experienced cohorts under trusted senior officers, tasked with encircling and holding the enemy in place. The center, commanded by Marius himself, advanced directly toward the Teutones' main forces, engaging them head-on. The reserve cohorts, positioned behind natural cover like hills and ridges, were ready to exploit breakthroughs or fill gaps in the line caused by enemy attacks. Each cohort was carefully assigned a sector of the battlefield. The left flank moved along the slopes of the nearby hills, while the right flank controlled the forested ridges, preventing the Teutones from escaping into rough terrain. The central cohort advanced through the open valley where the Teutones were concentrated, using disciplined formations to absorb the initial charge and push back in coordinated volleys of pila and close quarters engagement with gladi. Roman soldiers were not just numerous, they were trained to act as a unit. Under Marius, each cohort drilled repeatedly in advancing, holding lines, executing flanking maneuvers in coordination with neighboring cohorts. Standardized equipment ensured that each soldier could fight in sync, and the Eagle Aquila banners provided a visible point of reference to maintain cohesion under pressure. In contrast, the Teutones forces, while numbering roughly 120,000, including non-combatants, were poorly organized for a set-piece battle. Their fighting men were interspersed with wagons, families, and livestock, slowing movements and making coordinated responses nearly impossible. They lacked standardized training, formations, or a unified command structure. So, when the Roman cohorts engaged, the Teutones struggled to maintain cohesion. Individual warriors would charge without coordination, leaving gaps for Roman cohorts to exploit. The Roman attack was precise. The left and right wings closed in to prevent the Teutones from escaping into the surrounding forests and hills. The front line met the enemy head-on, and disciplined volleys of pila disrupted the Teutones' initial charges. Warriors were knocked off balance, and those in the rear struggled to push forward because of the pressure from Roman cohorts and the chaos in the front. Slowly, panic began to spread. The Teutones tried to regroup and form a defensive line, but the Romans had already targeted key positions. Marius's reserve cohorts moved in behind natural ridges and hills, cutting off any chance of retreat toward the forest. The Romans weren't just fighting. They were methodically tightening a noose, driving the enemy into increasingly confined spaces. As the day wore on, the Teutonese morale broke. Soldiers who had been fighting bravely an hour earlier began to glance sideways at the chaos around them, their comrades falling, families crying, wagons overturned, and livestock stampeding. One by one, the tightly packed enemy formations began to collapse. Groups of warriors turned and ran toward narrow mountain passes, hoping to escape. But Marius anticipated this. Roman cohorts on the flanks blocked the exits, forcing the fleeing Teutonese into bottlenecks. In these narrow passes, the chaos was complete. Warriors stumbled over fallen comrades and wagons. The elderly and children were crushed or abandoned, and those who made it to the front of the bottleneck were cut down by Roman spears and swords. Soldiers in the rear pressed forward, creating more confusion, while the Romans maintained formation and continued to push. The retreat of the Teutonese quickly spiraled into a full-scale rout, a scene of utter chaos that would be remembered in Roman history for generations. Panic spread through their ranks like wildfire. Warriors who had stood tall the day before now ran blindly, seeking any path of escape. Entire groups stumbled into wooded areas, only to find themselves trapped by the disciplined Roman cohorts, patiently waiting at strategic choke points. Others fled toward steep hills and ravines, unaware that Roman soldiers had already anticipated their likely escape routes. The terrain, which the Teutonese might have used to their advantage in better times, became a death trap under Marius's careful planning. Casualties mounted at an astonishing rate. Men were struck down by Roman spears and swords, but the slaughter was amplified by the chaos of the flight itself. Warriors fell over each other in the narrow passes, were trampled by stampeding livestock, or drowned in the shallow streams as they desperately tried to flee the battlefield. Mothers, children, and the elderly, caught in the throng, contributed tragically to the disorder, highlighting that this was not just a battle between armies. It was the collapse of an entire migratory people as a fighting force. By the end of the day, estimates suggest that the Teutonese were almost entirely destroyed. With their numbers approaching the catastrophic figure of 120,000. Their threat, which had once loomed over Italy like a gathering storm, was effectively neutralized in a single brutal encounter. In stark contrast, Roman losses were comparatively light. The disciplined organization, tactical innovation, and professional training of Marius's legions paid dividends. Roman cohorts maintained their formations even under the stress of battle, coordinated their attacks to prevent the enemy from regrouping, used the terrain to trap the fleeing forces rather than allow them to escape. Their losses, though real, were minimal in comparison, a testament to the effectiveness of Marius's military reforms. This was not just a victory in numbers, but a psychological triumph. The same republic that had suffered the humiliating defeat at Arausio now stood victorious over an enemy that had once seemed unstoppable. The impact on Roman morale was immediate and profound. Citizens and soldiers alike, still haunted by the images of Arausio and the thought of northern Italy being overrun, experienced a renewed sense of hope and confidence. The defeat of the Teutonese demonstrated that Rome could not only survive such a colossal threat, but also turn it into an opportunity for demonstrating the power and effectiveness of its reformed military. News of the victory traveled quickly, restoring faith in Roman leadership in reassuring allies and subject peoples that the Republic remained a dominant force in the region. Strategically, Aquae Sextiae marked Rome's first decisive act of revenge after Arausio. It was a clear signal that the Republic, now equipped with professional legions loyal to capable commanders, could respond decisively to existential threats. This victory also set the stage for the subsequent confrontation at Versailles in 101 BC, where the Cimbri would meet a similarly disciplined and battle-ready Roman army. Aquae Sextiae was a classroom in the harsh lessons of war. The Republic had learned them the hard way at Arausio, where internal divisions and personal arrogance had turned the Roman army into a catastrophe waiting to happen. That bitter experience provided a political lesson that could not be ignored. The dangers from within poor leadership, rivalries, and lack of cooperation could be even deadlier than the external enemy. At Arausio, split between Scipio and Mallius allowed the Teutones and their allies to exploit Roman weaknesses, turning what should have been a manageable confrontation into a massacre. At Aquae Sextiae, Rome remembered that lesson well. On the tactical level, Marius and his co-commander Quintus Lutatius Catullus demonstrated how discipline, planning, and clever use of terrain could overcome sheer numbers. The narrow valleys surrounding hills and wooded slopes near modern-day Axan Province were transformed from a passive backdrop into an active part of Roman strategy. Marius positioned his troops to control the key passes, conceal ambushes, and channel the enemy into zones where Roman cohorts could maximize their combat effectiveness. The night attack on the Teutonese camp exemplified the power of surprise, sowing confusion and lowering morale before the main battle even began. By the next day, Roman soldiers were able to advance in coordinated sectors, maintaining formation and exploiting every advantage the terrain offered. While the Teutones struggled to organize themselves against the disciplined, well-drilled legions. Strategically, Aquae Sextiae proved the enduring value of Marius's military reforms. These changes allowed Rome not only to survive the immediate threat posed by the massive migratory Teutones, but also to decisively defeat them, so that skill, discipline, and strategy could overcome numerical superiority. A principle that would echo through the Republic's military history for decades. This was a battle in which quality and organization triumphed over quantity and chaos. The arc from Arausio to Aquae Sextiae tells a story of transformation. After the disaster in northern Italy, the Republic faced the real possibility of annihilation. Marius's reforms turned that existential threat into a foundation for revival. The victory at Aquae Sextiae was Rome's first act of revenge, the proof that the Republic could rise from catastrophic defeat, and that the professional army was capable of solving crises that would have overwhelmed older citizen legions. In the process, Rome not only survived, but also redefined what it meant to wage war in the late Republic. Next, the story continues at Versailles in 101 BC, where Marius and Rome would strike again to end the northern threat once and for all. If you want to follow this epic story of survival, revenge, and transformation, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Great History. Stay tuned for our series, where we trace the Republic's struggle against overwhelming odds and the leaders who reshaped history. And see you tomorrow.